EVs are not the future, says Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford. You see, after years of meticulous development and adaptation of EV production, the entire car industry might have taken the wrong turn, and Ford will be among the first to correct this issue. In fact, Farley stated that returning to internal combustion engines is the way to go. And since internal combustion engines are vilified by the entire industry, you must be asking yourself, why the sudden shift? Well, you see, this wasn't a sudden shift per se. Despite the media constantly pumping us with over-bloated information on how internal combustion engines are a thing of the past, as well as practically guilt-forcing us into buying EVs, things aren't so black and white. In fact, after a massive rise in the popularity of EVs, the market hasn't just stopped growing, but sales have started dwindling altogether, and people, especially in the US, have returned to internal combustion engines. There are various reasons for this. First is the economic viability of EVs. Sure, the running costs of EVs are cheaper than internal combustion engines, but EVs are also 30% more expensive to buy compared to regular vehicles. Just compare the Ford Escape and the Ford Mustang Mach-E. These two are practically the same class. And apart from added performance and some stylish tech, the Mach-E is 50% more expensive than the equivalent Ford Escape. And while you can charge your EV for pennies at home, charging them at a fast charge station is far more expensive and borders the price of liquefied petroleum gas and compressed natural gas. Not to mention that recharging most EVs takes up quite a bit of time and that the infrastructure already struggles with the current number of EVs. And adapting it to an exponentially large number would be both incredibly hard and incredibly expensive. All these reasons have led buyers to start thinking through their choices to buy an electric vehicle, as the negatives for most buyers far outweigh the positives. You see, the issue is so severe that even Volvo, which was keen on electrifying its range by 2030, has postponed that milestone indefinitely. And it seems that the entirety of the car industry is doubting their decision to electrify most of their popular vehicles. Furthermore, electric vehicles have started to cost manufacturers dearly, as their development is extremely expensive, given how you'd need to develop an all-new platform for it. And governments have begun to stop production incentives. This, coupled with the lowered number of purchased EVs, makes them a literal money furnace. And currently, only a few companies such as Tesla are profitable, and even they are struggling. As a result, Ford has decided to cut its losses and reduce the production output and development of EVs, as, in the words of Jim Farley, they simply aren't meeting any of Ford's expected demands. Furthermore, Ford's entire line of pickup trucks, starting with the Maverick all the way to the Ford Super Duty, has exploded in popularity in the past few years, and it keeps rising, which is why they will focus on doing right by their customers. In fact, Ford has already announced that they are shifting production at the Oakville plant in Ontario from electric vehicles to gas-powered pickup trucks, as the demand for them is just so much greater and more profitable. However, with that in mind, EVs haven't been developed out of sheer curiosity, but rather necessity. We started making and buying EVs because of our own nature to reduce the carbon footprint and mitigate the greenhouse effect. And large pickup trucks are practical as they are at the top of the food chain when it comes down to pollution. This is why one must ask, what about ecology? Well, that's the problem. You see, EVs are nowhere near as eco-friendly as one would expect. Everything, and we do mean everything about them, was just highly inflated and borderline fabricated numbers that could have only been achieved under ideal conditions. However, in the real world, EVs tend to match the carbon footprint of internal combustion engines, sometimes even producing an increased amount of pollution too. You see, creating an EV is a much more time-consuming and much more complicated process compared to regular ICE vehicles, and it also pollutes much more than regular production does. In fact, some sources state that the production of an EV produces more pollution than a gasoline car does after 150,000 miles of driving. And the thing is, EVs don't only pollute by poisoning the air, as internal combustion vehicles do. Oh no, they can poison the soil and the water sources, and they do it in a much more imminent fashion than one would expect. How? Simple. Batteries. Lithium-ion batteries, to be more precise. You see, lithium mining is an extremely dirty process, even dirtier than oil mining. First, to acquire 1 ton of lithium, you need around 500,000 gallons of water. Water that cannot be reused because it is contaminated with harmful chemicals, such as heavy metals and salt byproducts. And where are you going to acquire such large amounts of water? That's right, in rivers. Once you dump all those chemicals in the rivers, you get soil and water pollution all throughout the river basin. This then leads to soil degradation and erosion, which completely eradicates natural habitats, as well as long-term ecological damage, turning the soil completely infertile. In addition to that, EVs pollute through carbon emissions, as creating lithium-ion batteries also releases CO2 in the air through various machines and methods of mining, refining, and transporting lithium. Some sources estimate that EVs create the same amount of CO2 emissions during their production as a modern, averagely driven gasoline car produces over its lifetime. And some would like to counter-argue their claim by saying that EVs pollute more upfront and less in the future, because ICE vehicles rely on fossil fuels. But to that we have a question: what do you think electricity is made from? Now, sure, EVs that are recharged at home pollute less than gas cars. However, some people must recharge them on fast chargers. And this is once again a highly polluting process. Sure, EVs, when recharged this way, pollute half as much as gasoline cars do. However, this is hardly an improvement considering how much more pollution EVs make from the get-go. In addition, lithium is relatively scarce, leading to it being vastly more expensive for manufacturers, meaning that their profit is not that great, considering how much they charge for EVs. Since it's scarce and, as we established, hard to recycle, it also doesn't help the long-term sustainability issue that we have with fossil fuels. Ford was aware of this from the get-go, and Farley knew that Ford hardly had a foothold in the EV segment, which is why he didn't push the total electrification, as he expected this sudden drop in popularity to happen eventually. So if ICE vehicles aren't the future, and if EVs are nowhere near as ecological as companies wanted you to believe, does this mean that we'll have to go back to bulls, horses, carriages, and bicycles? Well, no, not exactly, as there are more ecological options in development. Although riding a bike to town might not be a bad thing. More eco-friendly alternatives. The seemingly rapid transition to the old ways for car manufacturers isn't new per se. Car manufacturers have always seen EVs as a hardly profitable way forward, as they would require a complete change of automotive infrastructure through and through. And that is extremely unprofitable, highly complex, and very problematic to roll out, especially all across the world. Instead, what would be better is an adaptation of the current infrastructure to newer, more modern, and far less polluting propulsion systems. That would, of course, be biofuels and synfuels. That's exactly what Ford is aiming at. You see, this way they could keep selling, developing, and evolving their most popular lineup without any major change while also being very ecologically conscious. After all, internal combustion engines are the most polluting in the cities, as once you hit the road, they consume far less fuel, and as a result, produce far less CO2 emissions. So it's really the best of both worlds. Now sure, these solutions aren't the greatest, and they still pollute. However, they are a much better alternative to both fossil fuel cars and EVs, as these fuels can be used in already existing cars with very little modification or any if ever needed. Plus, combining a biofuel-powered combustion engine with a small electric system would result in emissions being even lower than EVs, according to various research. And that brings us to the evolution of EVs, which are sodium-based batteries. You see, sodium batteries have been gaining a heap of traction in the past few years, as they are multiple times cheaper to make than lithium batteries, and sourcing sodium is also basically pollution-free compared to lithium. Sure, sodium-ion batteries are less potent than regular EV batteries, but they are ideal for mild hybrids and plug-in hybrids. In addition, even this hybrid solution would be a short-term solution. You see, various companies are already developing alternative zero-emission propulsion methods for cars, with the most notable being hydrogen vehicles. Both internal combustion engines, such as the one used in the BMW Hydrogen 7, and fuel cell electric vehicles, such as the Toyota Mirai, are slowly but surely gaining traction. In fact, BMW and Toyota recently announced their partnership, and BMW officials stated that both companies will mass-produce hydrogen vehicles by 2028. Plus, who says that Ford won't enter the equation? Ford is always open to new ideas, and through this way, they will both be able to cater to the buyers who prefer internal combustion engines, as well as acquire a foothold over its rivals in the North American market. After all, converting a gas engine to hydrogen isn't impossible, as shown by the conversion of the mighty 1.6 turbocharged 3-cylinder from the Toyota GR Yaris. In addition to that, Toyota and BMW would also benefit from this, as they too will have a partner in the North American market, which would only firm their foothold in the market, and when combined, the three manufacturers will have their palms over all three of the world's most important automotive markets: US, Europe, and Asia. Now, hydrogen technology is still in its infancy, as storing and producing hydrogen is still highly problematic. As a result, these vehicles are still highly flawed and are very inept for day-to-day use. However, the same was true for early electric cars. These vehicles need further development, but in the meantime, biofuels and synthetic fuels seem like the best course of action. That said, we also believe that EVs aren't going anywhere. In fact, in our opinion, EVs will all but take over when it comes to city commuting, especially with the eventual replacement of lithium-ion batteries with sodium. Despite sodium-ion batteries being relatively impotent in terms of power and range, they're ideal for city driving, as you will have more than enough range to do your daily commutes, grocery shopping, etc., and then plug it in at home until morning. Fast charging will remain expensive, as this would be an excellent way to encourage people to recharge their vehicles at home. This way, vehicles won't clutter up fast chargers, which will in turn lower emissions. With a constant push towards solar and wind energy on an individual scale, recharging your EV will eventually become both carbon-free and practically penniless if you don't consider the price of solar and wind systems. But at present, EVs do tend to pollute a lot, and so do gas cars, which leaves us in a bit of a conundrum. And if we don't find a way to transfer the grid from fossil fuel reliant to fuel free, they will keep polluting no matter what we do.